I'm Mandi Barringer. I'm an Assistant Professor of Sociology at the University of North Florida, located in Florida in the USA. Today, I'm here to briefly discuss a recently published paper with my two co-authors. Our paper is entitled A Second Chance in the Sunshine State, Religious Identity and Voter Support for Re-Enfranchisement in Florida. My two co-authors, first author, Brenda Savage. She's an Assistant Professor of Sociology at Louisiana Tech University, located in Louisiana in the USA. And my other co-author is Michael Bender, also located at the University of North Florida with myself, located in Florida in the USA. He's also the director of the Public Opinion Research Lab at UNF. So today I'm just going to briefly discuss the purpose of the study, some of the findings and the implications of our findings, what that means for religion and politics, and the future. So in our study, we explore the relationship between religious identity, particularly focusing on evangelical Protestants, and punitiveness as a predictor of attitudes toward felon disenfranchisement in Florida. Before going any further, I think it's important to define what we mean by evangelicals in this particular study. So we define evangelical Protestants as those who identify as Christian/Protestant and who also identify as born again and or evangelical. So for this particular study, we're looking at felon disenfranchisement. This is considered one of the invisible punishments or collateral consequences associated with felony conviction and incarceration in the United States. So as of 2016, approximately 6.1 million Americans are not allowed to vote because of felony conviction. That is approximately 2.5% of the voting age population in the United States. We know that those with felony convictions are disproportionately Black, from lower socioeconomic statuses or low income and less educated. The policies of disenfranchisement and re-enfranchisement of people with felony convictions tend to vary at the state level in the US. It can range from no restrictions on voting for people who are incarcerated to the denial of voting rights, even post-sentence in some states. So felony disenfranchisement in the state of Florida, where I'm located and one of my co-authors. So in Florida, prior to November of 2018, Florida had enforced a lifetime ban on voting for its citizens who had felony convictions. Florida accounts for 48% of the national total of individuals who remain disenfranchised after completing all requirements of their felony conviction, including probation and parole. Nearly 1/4 of the Black population in Florida is disenfranchised, which is a huge amount. So with Amendment 4, right, in the 2018 midterm election for Florida, voters were given the opportunity to revisit and modify a longstanding practice of state disenfranchisement of people with felony convictions. So on the ballot it was referred to as number 4, Constitutional Amendment of the Voting Rights Restoration for Felons Initiative, commonly referred to as Amendment 4 by Floridians. This proposed a change to the Constitution of the state of Florida. It was worded on the ballot, as you can see here on the slide. This is exactly how it was worded. The amendment ended up passing on November 6, 2018, with 64.5% of the 60.4% voter turnout in Florida voted in favor of re-enfranchisement. The amendment went into effect in January 2019, but it has been met with resistance and controversy regarding its implementation. At this time, a public opinion poll conducted by our co-author, Dr. Bender, in the Public Opinion Research Lab was taken prior to the election and allowed for us to test this idea and our hypothesis that we believed evangelical Protestants in particular would take a more punitive stance towards Amendment 4 and state punishment. And we know, right, with existing literature showing kind of looking at attitudes towards felon disenfranchisement, existing public opinion research has examined attitudes towards felon disenfranchisement. And so it's not really centered or focused on religion or religious affiliation as a variable of interest, even though we know religion influences public opinion towards state punishment. What we found is when religion has been included in these studies looking at felon disenfranchisement, it tends to be an oversimplified categorization of religious categories. So they may not parse out evangelical Protestants versus mainline Protestants, which we know mainline Protestants tend to be a little bit more liberal, progressive in their attitudes in the US. If studies did include it, sometimes they would include attendance at religious services as a proxy for religious membership. However, in a subfield of religion in sociology, we know that the subcultural characteristics that exist between these religious groups affect their behaviors and attitudes towards social and political issues. Therefore, it's very important to parse out these, right? First, we need to include religion. And when we do include religion when looking at felon disenfranchisement, we need to parse out these groups and not just use attendance or other behavioral measures as proxy for group membership. And so that's what we did in our study. We know that religion, right, has affected attitudes towards public issues such as public law, right, criminal justice, policies. And so this is why another reason we distinguish between these groups, such as evangelical Protestants, mainline Protestants, Catholics, and so forth, when looking at felon disenfranchisement in Florida. In the United States, Christianity has the highest number of adherents of the major religious traditions. Therefore, Christian ideology ultimately affects the behaviors and attitudes of both religious and non-religious people due to its influence on social policies, laws, and institutions. We also know that among fundamentalist and conservative Christians in the US, they are more likely to take a punitive and retributive stance when it comes to deviance and crime. The research shows that evangelical Protestants, they tend to take a punitive, retributive stance, and it's found that it's linked to some fundamentalist beliefs such as biblical literalism. So a literal interpretation of the Bible. God is seen as masculine. There's this authoritarianism, punishment for sin, the belief in the transcendence of evil. And so these factors contribute to that more punitive stance that we know evangelical Protestants tend to take. Evangelicals' punitive mentality is further compounded by race. So we know that many white evangelicals generally emphasize punitive attitudes more so than Black evangelicals, especially those who live in the southern region of the United States. You may hear this referred to as the Bible Belt or just the South. And so geographic region definitely factors into these attitudes. Furthermore, we know that research shows race and religion conflate to affect voting behavior and attitudes towards punitiveness and state punitive in various ways. First, American evangelicals are predominantly white. Second, white evangelicals tend to be more punitive towards deviance, amplified in the southern states. Three, there's a history of racism and white supremacy in white evangelicalism. Fourth, this idea that America is a land blessed by God, giving equal opportunity to those regardless of race, ethnicity, directly connects to evangelicals' emphasis on individual responsibility. Fifth point, White evangelicals are more likely to oppose public programs and policies that help racial minorities. And lastly, we know that white evangelicals have a strong connection to Christian nationalism, which emphasizes social control, more punitive stance towards racial and ethnic minorities, while simultaneously overlooking institutional discrimination, situational context. It should be noted, though, that while all of that is found in a majority of the studies looking at race, evangelicalism, punitive attitudes, there is a subset of studies that find that fundamentalist Protestants, evangelicals, can be more forgiving in their attitudes. But again, these studies haven't teased out those nuances between the religious traditions. They tend to just focus on fundamentalist Protestantism, which is kind of an older term we would use now, rather than evangelical Protestants compared to mainline Protestants. So teasing out those religious groups is really important. So for our study, we did just that. In addition to looking at how religious identity affects attitudes toward felon disenfranchisement in Florida, we also looked at demographics such as gender, partisan registration, race and ethnicity, age, educational attainment. We were able to look at these various demographics because the data for our current study were collected by Dr. Bender's Public Opinion Research Lab at UNF via telephone between September 17th of 2018 and September 19th of 2018. With that, the intended population that Dr. Bender sampled from is likely voters. So likely voters who reside in the state of Florida and are 18 years or older. They were asked about local Florida issues, including Amendment 4. Dr. Bender's lab was able to attain this information. They used the Florida Voter File Database, which houses voters' phone numbers. In total, they collected 616 completed surveys. For our particular sample, this was a little smaller. It resulted in 513 respondents just because we eliminated missing data, those who didn't respond to Amendment 4, that particular question, right? Our analysis uses hierarchical binary logistic regression to examine the effects of religious identity and the additional demographic variables. Our findings show that evangelicals are less likely to support Amendment 4 in Florida. Before adding in the additional variables, so the gender, race, ethnicity, age, so before we added all of the into the model, we found that Christians, so that means mainline Protestants, evangelical Protestants, Catholics, were all less likely to support Amendment 4 compared to those with no religious affiliation. That finding tends to align with previous research that shows Christians tend to take a more punitive stance compared to non-religious individuals in the US. Once we accounted for the various demographic variables, evangelical Protestants still retain significant differences in their attitudes towards Amendment 4 when compared to the non-affiliated. So for us, we interpret this finding to mean that evangelical Protestants, compared to those with no religious affiliation, hold more punitive attitudes toward Amendment 4 and the restoration of voting rights to the formerly incarcerated. We find this particularly interesting, right, that we see that Christians as a whole, those different groups, right, tend to take a more punitive stance. But once we enter all of the demographics into the model, evangelical Protestants are the only ones that retain that significant difference in their less support for Amendment 4. So implications for this finding, right? Well, first of all, it highlights the importance of including religious measures that allow for the various groups to be teased out. To kind of briefly get into why sometimes it's not teased out. For surveys like Dr. Bender's, which are, right, they are conducted via telephone, a lot of the public opinion surveys just overlook including religion. And if they do include religion, they don't often include another quick measure to, right, tease out and operationalize evangelical. So adding in that question about asking participants, hey, do you identify as born again and or evangelical, helps to tease out those differences of Protestants, right? Instead of just having this large group. And so this study really emphasizes that public opinion labs going forward, especially when looking at issues like this, should include religious affiliation. And again, we emphasize that there are just subcultural characteristics between these religious groups. And so it's not surprising that they're going to hold differing attitudes towards Amendment 4. A well-known sociologist by the name of Darren Shearcat notes in the areas of religion and politics that religiously inspired political beliefs impact people's attitudes towards civil liberties, crime and punishment, including state-based punishment like Amendment 4. Shearcat argues religious institutions forge identities which leave an incredible mark on political beliefs and commitment. So policies such as Amendment 4 often get changed in response to public opinion. So understanding, right, the baseline levels of support or no support, right, for these different groups such as evangelical and mainline Protestants really gives policy makers a roadmap of how to go about attempting to change this public policy, right? Which group should we be targeting? Which group should we be reaching out to? Religion and politics in the US are so deeply intertwined and polarizing that we have to look at these issues, right? We know that political and social issues are often personal and perhaps tied closely to values, identities, and lived experiences. On the other side, we've got religion, right? Religion is also personal, tied to our identities, values, and so forth. And so although we have this concept of separation of church and state, right? In the US, many individuals and institutions do not separate religion and policies. They affect one another, right? And so even as the number of religiously unaffiliated rise in the US, especially among younger generations, church and state still remain intertwined in the various ways. For instance, we could look at the US Congress. Roughly 9 in 10 representatives identify as Christian. Another example would be, although the US Constitution does not mention God, every state constitution in the US references God or the divine, including Florida's Constitution. So for instance, in the Florida Constitution, it says, "We, the people of the state of Florida, being grateful to Almighty God for our constitutional liberty in order to secure its benefits, perfect for our government," and so forth. Another example of how politics and religion are intertwined. And we know that the influence religion has on a myriad of issues, right? Felon disenfranchisement, public health concerns, COVID right now, whether people should be wearing masks or not, or vaccinated or not, that's intertwined with religion. Religion will continue to have a profound impact on politics and public opinion. And whether we like it or not, it's going to probably stay that way for a while. And so it's just another example of why religion matters, especially when you're studying public opinion attitudes, right? You're looking at policy changes. We shouldn't forget the importance of religion and how religious affiliation, identity will impact attitudes and behaviors. And so I thank you for listening to this. And if you have any questions or comments regarding this study, I'm happy for you to reach out. I can be reached at m.barringer, B as in boy, ARRINGER @unf.edu. I will try to have that linked with this video. I'll also include a link to the article. I don't know if it can be accessed freely unless you have a library account, but again, just reach out to me if you have any questions about this study and or you're trying to access it. I'm happy to help. Thank you.